Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story, and we are a place of safety for our protectors. We are a no judgment zone, so please come and visit us. There's a lot of camaraderie and connection here, and this group understands. So today, I'm excited to have Chris Gregorio. He's a law enforcement officer in the Northwest. He will be hosting our guest today, Christopher Littrell. So I'll hand it over to you, Chris. Thanks so much.
Sir, and thank you for everybody for being here. Chris, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. I think this is a very important topic to talk about, whether it be military or first responders, as we kind of had an opportunity to speak before started recording about the importance of wellness and recognizing the cost of this job that I don't think is ever put out there. You know, everybody wants all the cool stuff of it, but they don't understand necessarily when we volunteer to do these jobs, what the cost of this job is. So we've got a retired law enforcement professional from Washington State, Chris Littrell, who spent some time in the Air Force, who spent a career doing everything that you would think you would want to do in law enforcement, from SWAT to detectives to field training to training, instructing. Just a very, very well-rounded guy. And our paths actually crossed in a canine seminar several years back. So thank you so much for being on here, Chris. And if you would, just kind of jump into how you chose this life of service.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Sarah and Chris. I really appreciate it. And for the other folks that are here, how did I pick a life of service? Wow. I am a third generation cop. So my grandfather was a reserve officer down in Brea, California in the 60s. And then my dad served here in the Pacific Northwest in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And I think that started the thought, but then really it was my older brother joining the Air Force and him serving in the Air Force. And I think that was the catalyst. I dressed up in his Air Force BDUs at the grocery store I worked at. I got married at 19. I'm working at this grocery store, and for Halloween, I dress up in his BDUs with my Air Force beret on, and I felt like $1 million. And I remember just kind of looking down and going, I want to feel like this always. Like, and my wife and I, we're doing the going to school full time, working 35, 40 hours a week. And so it was shortly after that while we were walking through our college campus, I saw an Army recruiter, and I looked at her and said, "Hey, what do you think about me joining the military?" And I'll tell you what, my wife's response, it has cemented my commitment to her, and I think hers to me. She just looks at me and goes, "Babe, we only get to live this life once. If you want to join the military, let's do it." I'm like, "You realize they might send me places?" She goes, "I don't care. Like, we'll figure it out." And so we both walked in, and I ended up joining the Air Force. And really, the rest is kind of history, right? I mean, I think for all of us that are these public servant minded folks, and it's not to take away from other jobs, but folks that have been in the military or first responder professions, I think once you get this taste of being part of a big team and really being part of something bigger than yourself, it's hard to do anything else, right? Like, I mean, I grew up playing sports in high school, and I competed my freshman year of college, and being part of a team is exciting. And so that's really was the start. I think my grandfather and my dad definitely were a piece of it in my subconscious. But when it came to that final decision to join the military, it was my brother, that recruiter who was just standing in his Army's best, and then my wife saying, "Go for it."
And what did you choose to do once you made that decision with your wife? And by the way, hats off to her. That is a huge, huge thing to have that kind of support system. I know, at least for my position, I joined the military right out of high school. I didn't have that. My mom kind of questioned, like, "Are you sure you're going to do that?" So to have that, it's amazing. And most often, I think our families don't have the opportunity, other than loving us and choosing to marry us, to live this life of service. So that's outstanding that you had that that foundation from the very beginning. What did you choose to do once you enlisted?
I'm going to get to that in just a second, but I just have to say, you're going to hear a common theme, depending on how far we get through my story. You're going to hear this common theme of my wife telling me, go and do. So once I joined up, I had a guaranteed job, but it was a easy one because they needed lots of us. Security forces. So that's the Air Force's title now for security police. It's It's a combined career field of security police, military working dog, and then combat arms training and maintenance, which used to be its own career field, CADM. So I got through my initial training at Lackland Air Force Base, where everyone goes. And then I was pulled in the day before graduation, and they said, "Hey, we need firearms instructors, but for you to do this, we're going to need to send you to another tech school." And all I remember thinking is, I'm listening to this E9, this chief master sergeant talk, and I'm like, as soon as he gets done talking, I'm going to tell him no, thank you. I want to be a cop. I want to be an Air Force cop. And then he goes, and you'll be on a 2-year controlled tour. All right, that's like offering a methamphetamine addict a little bit of methamphetamine. I hadn't been with my wife for 4 months, right? Like, I want to be with my wife in this moment. And when I heard 2-year controlled tour, they weren't going to deploy me anywhere for 2 years. I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I stayed at Lackland. I went to another tech school, became a combat arms instructor. And then I was kind of wearing two different hats, meaning I would later on in my career serve as an Air Force cop at different installations. And depending on the installation and the need, sometimes I would be a firearms instructor.
And how many years of active service did you fulfill?
Yep, I spent 6 years in the military, deployed to Iraq for 6 months, I didn't deploy, I was permanently change of station to South Korea during September 11th. And really those were kind of those big moments for my wife and I. We were really considering staying in. We liked the Air Force life. We didn't like being away from each other, but we liked our friends. We liked the opportunities it was creating for us. But I had missed both of my daughters. We had two daughters at the time. I'd missed both of their first birthday. And so that was probably the decision point for us. That's where we went. Do we stay in? Do we get out? And we made a decision in 2005 to get out. And really in 2004, I started testing for Washington State police agencies. And then we had to take a leap of faith because I didn't have a job. And the military was pretty much, you need to poop or get off the pot, right? Like, you're either staying in and reenlisting and sign here, or you're getting out and sign over here. And we were dragging our feet as long as we could. But finally, we had to make a decision. And really, it was a point of faith for us. We believed this was what God was calling us to do, a number of different circumstances. And so we made the decision, we're going to get out. And we separated. And it was during the separation process that I finally got the job offer to work for Linwood Police Department in Snohomish County.
You said you brushed by it, but I want to put a focus on it because I think that it's huge in the transition stuff. You said it's what God's plan for you was. How has faith played a role in the service that you've chose to do, your commitment to that, and all things being okay?
Yeah. For me, and I have friends all across the faith spectrum, atheist to Muslim, and I get along great with all of them. And for me, it's a huge piece because tell you what, I mean, this world can really kick us in the teeth, especially in the military and first responder career fields. And when I say first responder in this case, I'm almost folding in the medical fields, even our teachers on some aspects, because they are hearing people's trauma, seeing people's trauma over and over and over again at an aggregate rate that's not normal for the rest of our population, the people working in banks and grocery stores. Again, I have friends there, great professions, I love them, but they just don't see this stuff at the same volume. And if it wasn't for a faith perspective as I'm looking, that having that lens myself, I don't know if I'd have hope. This is just me personally speaking. And again, I have friends that don't agree with me on the faith level, and they do have hope. So I love it. But I don't know that I would have hope because as I'm looking at things, I am looking at them through a Christian worldview, and it gives me perspective of just where we're at as a society, and the fact that I believe that because of sin, because of things going wrong and being dysfunctional, I think it's the root cause of a lot of the problems we have. And so it definitely gives me perspective. It gives me perspective. It gives me hope. It gives me hope both for me and my family, but it also gives me hope for people that are in some really, really dire straits, right? The people that we're serving in the community that are just going through absolute heartbreak. And I have hope that that right now is really, really bad, but that it's going to get better.
Perspective, that's a word that comes up a lot, and I think is huge as we talk about this. But before we go forward, can you tell me, you said you spent some time in Iraq. Uh, did you experience anything over there that would lead towards either in the moment or future PTSD issues?
Yeah, I was in a pretty peaceful portion. I was stationed at Talil Air Base, which is near the city of Anasaria. Anasaria had some pretty good fighting while I was there, but the Italian military was taking care of most of that. I was there for 6 months and we got attacked one time. I was walking to work when the rockets were flying overhead. So I mean, it was a pretty, crazy moment for me because that was the closest that I had ever had to any type of bullet, getting close to me. And then it was kind of hard to get the Italian militia to respond to some of our OSI or Air Force Office of Special Investigations intelligence that they were getting about where the bad guys were. So finally, our colonel, our base commander, was like, forget it. We got Martin 18 machine guns. We have grenades. We have M2 Browning machine guns. We're going to start putting together some QRF, some quick reaction forces, and we're going to go out and assault these places. And so we did that. And so I was on one QRF. No contact was made. The intelligence was no longer good. But again, both of these, I wouldn't have known it at the time, but both of these were very, very they were impactful moments after that rocket attack. Uh, if you know what an M35 Deuce is, it's a personnel carrier, and when that big personnel carrier is idling, the axle has a whistling sound that sounds identical to the rockets flying over my head. And for weeks or months, I really can't recall at this point in my life, when I would hear an M35 Deuce drive by me, I wouldn't totally take cover. Like I wasn't jumping underneath couches and, stuff, but I would cringe. My body would tighten. I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But I just didn't know it back then, right? We weren't talking about post-traumatic stress. And so I wasn't realizing what my body was doing in preparing me for another attack.
And sorry to go in the weeds of this a little bit because I think that it's super important, but did you feel any type of way when you started feeling that? Did you feel any like you were weak? Did you feel like I shouldn't be affected like this? Or were you able to embrace that due to whatever the circumstances were?
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, so I'm best my memory can serve, I was giving myself grace in reference to that one because uh, I was ready to go out and like kick some people's teeth in, right? Like, I mean, we were pretty angry that we had been attacked. We didn't lose anyone that day, but we knew what was happening around Greater Iraq, and so, I had friends that were taking cover every day with rocket attack, right? I mean, that was just where they were at in Iraq. But we really realized that we had to be the tip of the spear. And the Air Force, especially when it comes to security forces, usually doesn't do this role. Usually we handle the airbase itself. And then we have the US Army, right, that takes care of the larger perimeter. And we really looked at ourselves as, hey, we got to be the tip of the spear. And so I think we had a shift in our mind, and I would later do this a lot on the SWAT team and on the street crimes team, where you just have to flip your brain. You just have to flip a switch, right? And it's like, hey, I'm gonna live, and so I'm gonna soldier on. I'm gonna be tough right now. And we really weren't taking the time to process the impact that it was potentially having on us.
Thanks for answering that. And I say that because, oftentimes we hear people say, I haven't earned the right to have PTSD, or I feel weak. I didn't experience what you experienced. And some people, it could be a rocket going over your head, not even letting close to have that type of impact. So I'm glad to hear that you gave yourself that grace. And for people that are going to be watching this in the future, trauma's trauma, right?
Yeah.
There's no levels. I mean, you only know what you've been exposed to. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you get out, you have that tour in Iraq, you do a tour in South Korea, and then you get out and you get hired with a law enforcement agency in Washington State. Tell us a little bit about that process and
Oh
that
my
transition.
gosh, hair on fire. Oh my gosh, I'm a cop now, right? Like, this is, I had been a police explorer. I'd rode with my dad and other officers, right? I got a taste of it in the Air Force, just a little taste. And now I was on a regular basis, I would look left and right and look at myself in my uniform and go, I could be a police officer tonight. This is so awesome. I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this stuff. And we had I-5 and Highway 99 cutting through the city of Linwood. And so there was plenty of criminals to chase. Back then, Linwood had a very, very, very loose pursuit policy. If you had an out tail light, we would chase you into downtown Seattle. And when we finally caught you, and people said, I thought if I just went faster, you had to stop chasing me, we'd look at them and say, don't come to Linwood. If you come to Linwood and commit crimes in Linwood, we will chase you until your wheels fall off. Now, in retrospect, not the smartest to always do that, but our officers also had a really high termination policy, meaning they would terminate their own pursuits. Rarely did a supervisor have to do it. So even though we had a wide open pursuit policy, we kept track of how often officers were terminating them and why they were terminating them. And the numbers showed they were making great decisions. And they were, when there was heavy traffic, when we knew the offender, when the original stop was an infraction, we were typically terminating those. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. Loved getting in foot pursuits. When someone took off running from me, I was like, oh my gosh, you're mine now. Physically running from me. And at the time, I was in really good shape. I was at the police academy. I ran a mile and a half at a 5:12 pace. I mean, I was right, like I was training hard, and I was like, I'm doing the Lord's work. And I say that somewhat jokingly, even though again, I come from a faith background. I didn't necessarily think God was telling me to arrest this one person tonight. It was just, kind of in a joking way. I was going out and doing the work to keep the community safe, and I absolutely loved it.
Sounds like you were fulfilling your dream.
Yes, 100%.
And for you, what is that like? I tell my wife all the time, I get to live my dream every single day. Most people don't get to do that for one day, let alone every single day. What is that like to you, to live your dream for 20, 25 years?
Oh, all I have, even though later here we're going to talk about, me experiencing post-traumatic stress injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, Looking back on it, the majority of what I remember is the great stuff, right? I mean, it's commingled the great stuff with the stuff I really don't like, death and child abuse. But I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. I wouldn't change a thing. Even the nightmare that the last year has been like for me, wouldn't change a thing. It was a true honor to get the chance to do the things that I did. And maybe I should keep talking here a little. Oh, there we go.
Were you still on there? Okay, there we are. Sorry, my internet connection's poor. How long were you a street cop before you made your next step after the academy?
Yeah, so I served at Linwood for 2 years. I lateraled over here to Kennewick. I couldn't get the job here first because my dad worked for Kennewick Police Department, and they had a really strict no nepotism policy. So I lateraled over here to Kennewick in 2007, served here on patrol for a year. And then in January of '08, we had a detective opening, and they called me into one of the detective sergeant's office, and there was me and one other lateral that had just gotten there. And he was like, hey, here's the deal. No one wants to be a detective right now. We've opened it up for everyone that's qualified. Nobody applied. Uh, you know, we're going to give you this chance. And I was like, no, thank you. I was like, I like being a street cop. And he was like, you don't understand. We're giving you. And I'm like, no, thank you. He's like, Chris, go talk to some people. I was like, okay, I'll talk to some people first, Sarge. Okay. So I went and talked to 4 different mentors, and 3 of the 4 said, take this opportunity. Even if you don't want to do it, go be a detective for 2, 3, 4 years. You will come back being a better street cop with that experience. And the one that told me not to do it, he knew how much I loved being a street cop and how much I loved chasing people. And so he was the one person that said, I don't think you should do it, Chris. But I made the decision to jump in it. So January '08, I became a detective at Kennewick. They're divided up by persons crimes and property crimes. And I became a persons crime detective. So homicide, kidnapping, all that really exciting stuff. At the time, that not a lot of that was happening in Kennewick. So what I found out really quick was that I was a child crime detective, because that was happening at huge volume. And somewhere in that same 6 or 8 months after that, I tried out for the SWAT team. I joined the SWAT team. Somewhere in that same time window, I joined our peer support team. And then somewhere in that same window, I joined the non-vocational group of pastors at my church. I'm putting a little asterisk there because there's this little thing called boundaries in life, and we can't do it all the time at the same time. And we really have to make good decisions there. And I was young. I don't think I was immature necessarily in my behavior, but I was definitely immature in this regard that I was making a choice to just keep saying yes to all these things. And it eventually proved to be too much. In 2010, I, uh, I was getting called in constantly for the SWAT team, for peer support, uh, for um, for detectives, and I'd been investigating a gang shooting all week. I was also another hat I wore during that time was gang detective for my agency. So I was coming in every time we had a gang violent shooting or drive by, and uh, and I ended up having a massive anxiety attack that felt like a heart attack. And we called 911. I sat on the floor, got ready to die. Said goodbye to my wife, and I mean it was another one of those huge moments, right? And figured out pretty quick. I mean, the paramedics got there, they hooked me up. I eventually went to the ER, and every test I did there initially and then later with specialists was that, dude, you are super healthy. Like your heart, this is an anxiety thing. And that was hard because I think we struggle. I definitely struggled. And I think we struggle as a culture because our physical injuries are so easy to see and identify. You can see them on an x-ray. You can see them sometimes physically just by looking at a person. When it comes to our mental injuries, we can't see it. And that's really causes us to look at it differently. I think causes us to look at the injury differently and the healing process. And thankfully, I had a counselor I trusted and a doc that I trusted, and I let both of them start treating me. Unfortunately, I didn't do it initially. So that was in March, and I did a little bit of help, a little bit of therapy. They were like, "Hey, we should probably put you on some medication." So no, I don't do that. I barely take multivitamins in the morning. And so fast forward to July, we were on a family trip and had another large anxiety attack that felt like a heart attack. And right as I was having that, the intrusive image of me killing myself was flashing through my head. And I had never thought about that before. And now it's not even me thinking about it. It's like the image, like a video just played through my mind. And I was certain I was crazy. I was certain I was one of them. And when I say them, I'm talking about the people that we engage on the street that are crazy. And kept it quiet for about a week. And then finally, I told my mom, and my mom told me, "Chris, you really got to tell Jamie. You got to tell your wife." And I was like, "Mom, I think she might leave me. Like I'm crazy." And she's like, "Has she ever said anything like that to you? Like she'd leave you?" No. Trust her. Try. So I ended up mustering up the courage that night to tell my wife what was going on. And I asked her, I said, "Do you need me to leave the house?" And she's like, "Do you need to leave the house?" And I was like, "I don't know, babe. Like, I don't know. I don't trust me. I'm the problem right now." She was like, "Stay home. Stay home. Tomorrow, go back to that counselor and let her help you now. Let her put you on medicine. Do the therapies that she's telling you to do." So that was 2010. And I went in and of course, sat on that couch and just sobbed and just got it all out. And then I was ready for the counselor to be like, "Okay, you need to turn in your badge. You need to turn in your gun. You are nuttier than a fruitcake," right? This is what I was thinking she was going to say. "And you can never be a cop again," right? And here's the straitjacket. Please go ahead and put this on. Make sure that it fits properly for when we need to put this on you. But that's not what she said to me. She looked me in the eye and said, "Chris, do you know how common this is? All of these symptoms, all of these reactions you're having in your brain, and some of the ones I was having in my body, like those heart attack symptoms." She goes, "That is super common. And I can't tell you how many police officers and firefighters and paramedics have told me the exact same symptoms on that same couch where you're sitting right now. And there's a lot of science in this, and we're going to help you get better. Do you trust me?" I was like, "Yeah, I trust you." She's like, "All right, let's do this together." And it took probably about 6 weeks before I felt better. I was like, "Yeah, I'm starting to feel better." Probably about 6 months before I was like, "Wow, I'm back on my feet." And then I continued for about 3 years doing therapy. And I stepped off the SWAT team, not because that was my big stressor, but because I needed to simplify life. I stepped off being a pastor at my church. I switched from child crimes to property crimes. Here's the deal: I want your big screen TV back. I want to get it back for you, but I am not losing sleep over your big screen TV. I'm losing sleep over Jimmy and Susie and their stories of abuse. That's what was really rocking my world: the death scenes and the child abuse stuff. So 2013, man, I had a new chance at life, right? Like, I mean, like, I feel like $1 million. Like,
Reborn.
I'm loving my job again, right? I'm on patrol towards the end of 2013. I became a school resource officer. I love working with kids. Life is amazing.
And so to go backwards just a little bit, and I don't think I've ever asked this question of anybody before, was it the conglomeration of scenes and victims that did this? Or is this just a causation of saying yes?
Both, both. One, I was saying yes to too many things. And so here's the narrative going through my mind. You are a failure. You're a failure as a dad. I'm yelling at my kids, right? Like I'm having these big emotional reactions at home that are not measured for what's going on in front of me. I have or I had three daughters at the time. And if one of them hits the other one, I'm in their face. You don't touch my girls. And what I thought I was teaching them was that dad will always be here to protect you. If anyone ever touches you, you tell dad and I'll take care of it. But what they were hearing and seeing is that dad is big and scary because I'm screaming at sister, right? And so they're like, oh, like, is he gonna get physical with sister? And I wasn't getting physical. I mean, there were certainly times that I picked up a kid and took them to their room, and that's super scary for a kid too. So I was getting physical in that way, but I wasn't, beating my kids. But I was still, I mean, they probably thought I was gonna, as big as I was getting, right? My wife would be like, Chris, you're flying towards them. That's scary for little girls with tender hearts. You need to take a breath. And I certainly was trying, but I just didn't realize what was happening in me, right? Like I didn't understand why I was flying off the handle and screaming and yelling at him. And I'd hold it together at work. Like I wasn't doing this stuff at work, right? And then I'm coming home to the people I care about the most, and I just got nothing left. So yeah, I really saw it as both. The narrative going through my mind is you're a failure as a dad, you're a failure as a husband, you're not a good enough of a SWAT cop, before 2010, because I'm not working out as much as I think I need to. I'm not falling behind in SWAT training, but I'm telling myself you should be the top. You should be the number one shooter. You should be the most push-ups, most pull-ups. Uh, And so it was that narrative. And later here in 2023, when I was in a PTSD recovery center, they call them stuck points. Those things in our lives that constantly trip us up, those narratives that we recycle that are not helpful. You're a failure. You're a failure. You're a failure. And if you pause yourself and go, am I really a failure? Am I really failing at everything? Well, no, actually, no, actually, you just failed at this one little thing. Okay, so I made a mistake here, right? Like, let's right the mistake. Let's learn from the mistake and move on. But yeah, really, it was both. It was the quantity of stuff that I was doing that had that narrative going, and then again, the death scenes and the child abuse. I was cringing. Not at first, man. At Linwood, before the medical examiner would come out, we would glove up. We would do a head to toe examination of the deceased. Um,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, I'm doing it and it's not bothering me. Like, I remember I didn't love it, but it's my job. I really had like a scientific lens as I was doing that job. Well, at this point in 2010, I'm no longer looking at that scientifically. I am now like cringing when I'm stepping into these child abuse and death scenes.
Previously, you were emotionally unplugged, but then once you stepped into that other role, there was an emotional tie there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What to we'll get to the PTSD recovery thing here in just a minute, but just to kind of go back, and I think that this is a critical part. What do you think the sources of your, and I think that we often do this as professionals in these lines of work. Why is it for you that you felt compelled to always say yes? Is it a self-worth issue? Was it that something where you felt that you weren't earning it unless you did X, Y, and Z, that you weren't good enough? Kind of like you were saying, I think you touched on it, but will you go into that just a little bit more?
Honestly, that's a pretty big question. I think a lot of stuff that we battle with as adults does come from our childhood. Now, keep in mind, I'm best friends with my parents now. We get together and play cards. I love them. They were good parents for me. They showed up, they touched me appropriately, they affirmed me, didn't yell and cuss at me to speak of. I mean, there were times I got yelled at and I deserved it. Um, but I I I had a working mom and a working dad. And I remember from the age of about 9, I was home alone a lot. At the age of 8 is when I got exposed to and addicted to pornography. My parents split up and they started going through a divorce. My grandparents split up. So from about 1 to 8, life was perfect. Like literally life was perfect. Everything was stable in my life. And again, it took a PTSD recovery center for me to realize this because they kept asking, tell us about your childhood. And I was like, I got a good childhood. Shut your mouth. Let's talk about the police work. And then I realized, wow, when I was 8, there was a lot of like, how does an 8-year-old process grandma and grandpa getting a divorce, mom and dad splitting up and starting the divorce process, later coming back together, but starting. And then at 8 years old, getting exposed to pornography, right? Like how do you process this stuff? It's not normal for an 8-year-old brain. And so I think, this is me thinking, I think this drive to be successful came partially out of that. And then the other piece was if you start driving to be successful so that people can recognize you and go, wow, good job, right? You're grabbing people's attention. Wow, good job. It kind of gets addictive. And I was very successful through high school and college in sports. I mean, I'm getting medals. I'm on the podium. I joined the Air Force. Same things happening. I'm getting the medals. I'm getting the plaques. I'm get to Linwood and I at the police academy. I graduated. I was our class president. I graduated top of the class. I was best firearms. And my class voted me in as the partner they would want on scene. Right. So it's just feeding this ego. Now I wasn't walking around going, I'm better than all of you. Right. Like that was not, but I was definitely hungry for the accolades. I was hungry for people to recognize that I was doing stuff. So I think that's what continued to feed me. I was defining, and I think a lot of men and women struggle with this in profession. I was defining my worth based on what I was producing. And for most of my life, until here more recently, my definition of production, what I was producing, had to do very much with work and less to do with my family. And even when I became a sergeant for the police department, I had to redefine production because before production was tickets, arrests, criminal investigations. This was the metrics, right? Really coming out of the industrial age where we used to measure widgets as Americans. How I had to redefine that as a supervisor. I had to start measuring production by me investing in my folks. Roadsides and listening to the people I was responsible for was production. Before me roadsiding a partner, I didn't consider that production. If a partner wanted to roadside me, I'd be there for 5 minutes and I'd be like, dude, let's go find someone to arrest because that's fun. And so I know it's a really roundabout kind of rabbit trail answer, but I think it's a complicated question of why.
It is.
Why was I acting like that? And I think it was all of that was why I was saying yes to so many things and not setting boundaries and really recognizing what was most valuable.
Thank you. And this next question, if you just take about 2 minutes to answer, because I really want to get to your PTSD stuff, but kind of setting up for future conversations. In 2000, I think you said it was 2010, where you went through that panic attack and pretty intensive counseling and things like that. Was there a point there in your law enforcement career where you're like, you know what, maybe this is it for me. Maybe I should walk away versus, you know what, I think I can punch through this. I can get better and continue on. Can you talk about that process for you just a little bit?
Yeah. I never envisioned myself walking away in 2010. I thought they were going to take it away from me. I thought they were going to say you can't be a cop no more, and that's what I was scared of. But once that counselor told me, Chris, you're going to get better, and then I had some friends come up to me, and they didn't know exactly what I had going on, or even if I had anything going on. But I had some folks come up to me and tell me their story, and that's where I see the power of what you all are doing here and other podcasts are doing is folks stepping up and being courageous and telling pieces of their story that they feel comfortable sharing because that that was huge in 2010. There weren't podcasts back then doing this. And so the friends that walked up and said, hey, Chris, can I tell you about my wife? I don't know why I feel compelled to tell you this, but a couple years ago, she was battling postpartum and she came up to me and asked me to lock up all the guns. And I really respect this woman. I mean, she is a gentle flower. I just have a huge amount of respect. And so as this friend is sharing this with me, I'm sitting there thinking, why are you sharing this with me? Like, you don't know what I have going on. But him sharing it with me and then hearing that he locked up the guns to make her feel more comfortable. And then she did some work and got to a really healthy spot. It gave me hope. It made the words of my counselor saying this is really common and you're going to be okay. It made me believe those words.
Thank you. And just for future stuff, stay tuned because we're going to have a conversation where we're talking about if you have the ability to walk away from this career. You know, some people can do it for 2 years and some people are able to do it for 45 years. You know, you give what you can. So stay tuned for that future conversation. And Chris, I'd like you to be part of that as well. So you've battled on, you pushed through, you got your counseling. Are you living a more natural, healthy life and dealing with things as they come now? How does that progression go to where you end up to retirement?
Yeah, so the SRO position really helped with that because I had a daughter going to the high school. My wife was substitute teaching at the high school. I'm working at the high school. I felt like our life just got really simple for a while. Everything revolved around the high school where we worked, and I really loved working with the kids. And some people were like, I could never be a SRO, a school resource officer. Kids are knuckleheads. Well, yeah, sometimes on the street at 2 o'clock in the morning, they are knuckleheads. But I'm telling you, when you show up every day for them, they start showing up for you too. They start showing up and showing you respect and appreciating you being there. We're talking gang members. And I know that's not the experience for every SRO across the country, but that was my experience at my school where I had a good relationship with almost all the students. And so yeah, life got simple. Somewhere in there, I decided to test for sergeant, 2016, and I ended up getting promoted end of 2017, and started being a supervisor and loving that. You know, I had to leave the school to do this, but I really enjoyed investing in this younger generation and learning from my 2010 story and trying to make it easier for them. Shortly after that, I got promoted to our street crimes team as the detective sergeant. Never been a street crimes detective, and they were a high performing team. So I really just I had to stay out of their way. You know, I mean, it was my job to make sure we stayed within the lines of case law and whatnot. But it was a fun team to work on. Probably my favorite team, even better than SWAT, because on SWAT we were a regional team that only got together every once in a while. This street crimes team, we worked together every single night. And sometimes I'd be dressed in street clothes. Sometimes the team would put me out in a field with binoculars, looking at a target residence, right? And it was super, super exciting stuff. Unfortunately, with that team, because we were chasing really, really violent people, we were not getting good sleep. We'd come in on our Monday, which was a Tuesday, and we worked to five at night till 3 in the morning. And sometimes my boss would be like, "Hey, Chris, we need you to rotate to be here at 8 a.m. on Friday. Can you guys rotate?" Well, I'd leave it up to the team, but the team always said yes. I mean, they wanted to chase whoever the biggest, baddest criminal was. So if that's what the agency needed or regional agencies needed, they were like, "Yeah, let's do this, Sarge." So we'd go from, being on a night schedule on Tuesday night, and by Friday we needed to rotate to being up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and ready for shift. And I really didn't realize at the time the impact that sleep has on our mental and physical health. Great book out there by Dr. Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, gets into it. Recently, the Huberman Lab also had Dr. Walker on, and it's just fascinating. That was one of the things I was really doing wrong, and I didn't even realize it. During COVID, I decided to get a punch card from the liquor store. I don't know if you know that they give them out, buy 10, get one free. Actually, I'm joking. They don't actually give out punch cards, but that's the way I was treating it. Uh, and alcohol wasn't my thing. I mean, like I drank beer. I would drink wine. Uh, but then during COVID, like I created a liquor cabinet at my house. And if on the days I didn't work, I drank. And yeah, the political unrest, the changes in laws, for whatever reason, I really took that stuff hard. I internalized a bunch of stuff that I probably shouldn't have internalized. And it really started to wear on me. Keep in mind that I'm now supervising a street crimes team, right? So what do we do when there's a homicide at midnight? We're going, right? Like we're starting the investigation, and then maybe day shift detectives are coming in. Actually, most of the time they'd come in. And actually, towards the end, they started calling us in on every homicide because they wanted us mobilized and ready to chase after the suspect. And so they started bringing us in on the front end. We would co-work the investigation with day shift detectives, and then as soon as we had a lead, my team would break away and we'd start chasing after bad guys. And so now I'm getting death scenes again. And at 11 o'clock at night, if there was a child abuse case, instead of calling in day shift detectives, the street crimes detectives would take it, just try to keep those guys at home sleeping, right? So now I'm supervising child abuse cases. And it's starting to impact me, and I could feel it. I knew it was happening, but I just didn't know how bad it was. I switch over to community services sergeant because they had that opening and they needed someone to fill it. And now I'm supervising the school resource officers who take child abuse cases from time to time. So I'm supervising those again, right? And and fast forward up to the June of last year, 2023, I felt it. I felt it for a while. I went back to a counselor, was doing some great EMDR work that was helping resolve some stuff. I was filling in for some of my resource officers when they were gone, and so I took some investigations myself, child abuse cases, and um, and finally when I spiraled, I was exhausted, and I went to bed about 8 o'clock, thinking I was just going to knock out, and and I laid in bed till about 2:30 in the morning. And for the first time in a decade, I felt this heart attack symptom, anxiety attack starting to come over me. And previously, I would jump out of bed and start freaking out. And this time, I just literally raised my hands and I just started praying to God. I was just like, you know what, God, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I can't fight it. So if it's going to happen, let it happen. Let's get through this. And it built up and then it subsided. It didn't go into the full attack. But the very next thought was that intrusive image of me killing myself. And I was just like, man, at that point, I guess it had been about 13 years until those vivid images had been flashing through my mind. And I was like, I don't want this. I have an amazing medical team, and I really believe everyone should have a doc, should have a mental health professional, should have a lawyer that you have an established relationship with to where if you ever need to call them in crisis, you can. I reached over to my phone. I sent my doc a message on the portal just saying, I'm not well and I need to be on leave. I need to be on 30 days of leave to figure this out. She'd already known some stuff was going on. Her and I talked about it a couple weeks before. So yeah, she put me on leave. I made some decisions and went and checked myself into Deer Hollow, a PTSD recovery center in Draper, Utah, just outside of Salt Lake City, and started doing some really hard work there. When I got back, I did intensive outpatient therapy for another 6 weeks, where you meet for 3 hours a day for 3 days a week. And it was somewhere during intensive outpatient therapy, that I was like, I can't go back. I can't. I was having some pretty big PTS reactions, post-traumatic stress reactions to locations in my city. I hadn't had that before. It was like if you're a good stuffer, if you can stuff emotions and things down, as long as you keep that stuff bottled up, right? The problem is it's like a soda bottle, right? You shake that up. Man, you shake that up enough, eventually the top's going to pop off. And my top had popped off, and now I just couldn't keep any of it in. And so, yeah, I'm having big reactions by baby death scenes and death scenes and child abuse cases and use of forces I was involved in. Just as I'm going around town, I'm seeing a late model Honda take a hard right at an intersection, and I'm getting amped up, right? Like I'm like ready to get into a fight. And I'm going, holy smokes, what's going on? And I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, okay, that makes sense. It makes sense of what just happened and why my body's reacting to it. So yeah, somewhere in there, I decided, yeah, this isn't going to work. And I didn't share this, but before I went to Deer Hollow, I was really struggling with it, because to go to a PTSD recovery center, you pretty much have to put your life on hold for 35, 45 days. And that was really hard. I'm the guy that's leading our peer support team, right? I'm like the wellness guy. And I'm the guy that needs this stuff. So I was struggling, and my chief calls me. They don't recognize it because it's on my personal phone. I answer it with Chloe. He's like, hey, Chris, this is your chief, Chris Guerrero. I'm like, hey, what's up, chief? He's like, hey, man, I know you're going through some stuff. I just want you to know I got your back. I need you to take the time. Do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. Heal up. I want you back. And if you can't come back, I'm going to celebrate you as you leave. So take as much time as you need. Take care of you. Take care of Jamie. Take care of your girls. And I'm sharing this part of the story because I got a lot of friends around the state that this has not been their experience. And I don't think I don't think they're evil. I don't think command is evil. I later found out that my chief was ordered by human resources not to call me, because they didn't know what my triggers were, and they didn't want to have a city official triggering me. So they had ordered my chief and command staff not to call me. I don't know if my chief broke the rule, and I speak publicly of it because I actually told this to city council when I left. I applauded him. I applauded the way the city engaged me because it's not normal from my experience. But, and then my wife. And just like years ago at that college campus, when I told my wife, babe, we need to cancel our 25th wedding anniversary. We need to cancel the family vacation. Like, I can't do this. Not well. And she looked at me and said, go. My wife needed that vacation. She said, go. I'll take care of the family. I'll take care of the stuff. I've done this before. You go take care of you, get back to us, and then we can talk about stuff. So, no, that's an awful lot.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, and I want to open this up. And I don't know for anybody else has questions. For police leaders that may be watching this, how important was that to you as the officer going through that, to have that verbal affirmation, that support, not just for you, but for your family? How important was that?
It meant everything. I don't know if I would have mustered up the courage to go. I had all kinds of excuses of why I shouldn't go to a PTSD recovery center, all kinds of stigma. I'm going to be one of them, right? I don't really have an alcohol problem, do I? I don't drink on Monday through Thursday. All kinds of things that were going through my brain. And even though, like, from a legal standpoint, I didn't need my chief's permission, it's none of his business, actually. But him reaching out to me and just being human. Me and my chief, we were partners and detectives for a short time before he started getting promoted. And then he always stayed at least one rank above me after that. Um, and just him reaching out to me as a human being and taking a risk, right? What if I would have had a big reaction and now I sue the city or whatever? He took a risk by calling me, but I think it was a calculated risk. He knew he had a relationship with me. He knew I liked him, and he'd been a mentor for me, a lot of times. So I think as chiefs and sheriffs, you got to measure that, right? If HR is telling you not to do something, think about it for a little bit. Do you have a relationship with this officer or deputy or firefighter or whoever? If you don't, who in your command staff does? If none of them do, okay, one of your sergeants, do one of your sergeants have that relationship? And if you find the person that has a relationship, somehow communicate. Don't call them up and make them feel like they're being investigated. Don't call them up and be like, all right, so what are you doing? Tell me about your symptoms. Don't do any of that. Just call them up. No magic words. Hey, I support you. Heal up. Take as much time as you need. If you can come back, love it. I want you, right? You make them feel part of the team still. If you can't come back, we're going to celebrate you.
Love it. Thank you so much. And we'll open it up to questions here for just a second. And then at the very end, I want to give you some time to talk about your podcast. And then we can put in the links to this for people that are watching the website for the stuff that you're doing, as well as your podcast. So thank you for being so open and vulnerable, Chris. I really appreciate that. It really does a tremendous amount of help. Helping ourselves through helping others is kind of a big deal, right? So thanks again. Scott, go ahead. Why don't you pump first, brother?
I just have to say, this is absolutely one of the best interviews I've seen in quite a while. I've been paying attention to these type of interviews for a number of years. Certainly there have been a host of people that have come on this program, The Power of Our Story, and have shared. You have an outstanding ability to communicate at a level that is understandable for so many people. And then in doing that, it causes people, I would imagine, it certainly does me, to think about my history, to think about the things that I went through as a Marine, uh, even going as far back to, your childhood. My folks separated when I was maybe a year or two older than you. And so just beginning there and moving forward, the similarities, you and I served in the Marine Corps. I was on the front end of the invasion going into Iraq in 2003. We pushed up to Anazaria.
Yep.
I was there, and just so many things. Being a dad of daughters, and finding myself, upset about something that if they would have been boys, I made it very clear to them what would have happened if they were boys, thinking I'm doing, and it wound up, scaring my youngest.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that until she told me years later. Boy, I felt like, a failure as a dad because I never laid a hand on my kids, never. But I was stern, when I felt that they needed that. But you sharing the way you did, I think makes people assess themselves to say, hey, wow, listen to this story. And I'm going to, Sarah, when you're ready to post this thing and it goes on LinkedIn, I'm going to hop on and endorse the living mess out of this because it resonates. People who haven't served, whether it's, first responders or the military, they need to see this. They need to listen to what you're saying because you're shedding light on something that's so important for people that do serve, the things that, especially you guys and gals that are police officers, you guys are in this 24/7. As a Marine, if I deploy, I'm expecting it.
Yeah.
If I'm training, I've got my head on a swivel. But when I come home, you know, it's very different. Every day you guys are in harm's way. And the stress that puts on people is incredible. And then, like you said, at some point, if you're putting things in their box or their bottle or whatever you want to classify it, and you tighten it up and you move on, at some point those things are going to start doing this. Uh, and I think a lot of people have no clue. They just look at one instance and then they're judging because they don't understand what's happening in the background. And and Chris G, your questions are great questions that allowed Chris Littrell to elaborate on things that were important in his life. I am so thankful, and I'll end with this. God bless you, brother. And I'm a believer, and I think we're all here for a reason. Sometimes we don't know, and until we go through certain things in life. But God gave you one heck of a wife.
Yes,
You are a blessed man. I'll leave it with that.
I agree. Thank you, Scott.
Amen.
Thanks, God. Jim.
Chris, thanks for this. I think you said so many key things, and my background is I was in the fire service and had the opportunity to rise to the position of fire chief and also serve as a city manager for a short period of time and assistant city manager. So I've seen the bureaucracy at all levels, and I think a couple of things you said was as leaders, we have to remember to be human, and we need to have that human connection. And I dealt with my own baggage, and I'm still addressing some of those issues today, right? But I recognize, as you said, that chief calling you and reaching out and how critical that was. But I've also been in that realm where I was restricted or told, that you couldn't do that type of thing. And it was very difficult, and I had some instances where, that really kind of tore you apart and that type of thing. And the impact on family, as you mentioned, and Scott talked about as well. I had the opportunity to share my story through a process where it was recorded and sent it to my kids who are, adults now, right? And, they had no idea what had occurred, why I was the way I was when they were teenagers, that kind of thing. And so I think those are huge elements for people to understand and recognize and look for those opportunities to address them as they're occurring. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Catherine.
Thanks, Chris. I just wanted to kind of echo what Jim and Scott said, but especially what Scott was saying. I'm not in law enforcement, but my dad was lieutenant of Special Victims Unit, actually, and he oversaw the children's division here in Philly. It's sexual assault and children and at-risk people, and he oversaw the children and at-risk people. And it definitely takes a special person to be able to see that day in and day out. And again, I'm the daughter of a police officer, and so the part of your story that you shared about your kids really touched me. And I think something that I talk about a lot is just the awareness and being intentional and mindful about how you are with your kids, because it's easy to talk yourself out of what you may or may not be doing in their lives. And you touched on that both with, you know, how you treated your kids, and then again with the drinking. It's easy to say, well, I don't do what so and so does, or I don't drink as much as this person, or Monday through Friday and things like that. And it's really easy to talk yourself into justifying certain actions. So I think that those areas of your story really kind of stood out to me, because I think that they can really help a lot of people who are watching this. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that leader who called you, because that's something that I think can be lacking in a lot of places. And just this morning, I was talking to a woman who's married to a police officer, and her husband happens to have a very supportive lieutenant who is in contact with them and reinforces everything that they need to do to put their kids first. And she was telling me that her friends in the space don't have that. And so I just think you sharing your experience with your captain and your chief, I forget what you said, but just that leadership experience to let other leaders know that sometimes you might need to take those calculated risks and do what's best for the human on the other side of the phone. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You know, I think this is something pretty special. This is one of those times where there's not a lot of questions, but you can see in real time the impact that these kind of shares have in real time. Sarah, I see your hand up. Sarah.
Chris, I just want to thank you for coming on. I heard hundreds of stories at this point. And in fact, a lot of the people on this call have heard them with me. And I just want to remind you how powerful your story is to helping somebody else. I just applaud your courage. I applaud you going forward and being a servant leader and helping other people in a different way. It's so heartwarming. I really appreciate your vulnerability. You sharing your story is really filling in the gaps of another person who may be feeling a lot but can't articulate it. So I'm saying a lot of the same things that people on the, have already shared, but just again want to reiterate that from my angle. I tell people this all the time, but I feel like it's a good reminder that the whole reason why the power of our story exists is because one veteran shared his story with me, to a civilian who was detached from the cost of war, from the military, from first responders, just in my own world being busy raising kids.
Yeah.
So I've got 4 boys, not 4 girls like you, but I just, again, just want to tell you your story is powerful, and it's going to touch people. It's already touched our hearts, and we hear stories all the time. And just the power of your story is going to have a ripple effect. So I just want to thank you so much. And again, Chris, Gregorio, you always do a phenomenal job hosting. So I want to thank both of you so much.
Yeah, you're
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chris.
And real quick, Chris, if this is kind of a short format. I know you do some stuff on the side where a little bit longer format. And if you want to learn more about Chris's journey and in more detail and his contact information, it's going to be in the link below. But Chris, tell us what your podcast is and some of the stuff that you're doing on the side. If there's a website that they could reach you at.
Yeah.
Follow your work.
So my company is Gravity Consulting and Training, and through that I have the Gravity Podcast. From a paid perspective, I'm taking leadership principles that I've been teaching to Washington State supervisors for the last 4 years, and I'm trying to brand that over and teach that to the business community here in the Tri-City, Washington area. In addition, I've been doing a lot of employee wellness stuff, both for civilians, but then also for first responders. On a non-paid perspective, because I'm so outspoken about my story, and I do it all over social media and then on the podcast, I have a lot of people reach out to me because it's scary. And it's scary to be going through this. It's scary because you don't understand process. You're afraid of losing your job. There's just a lot of fear. And so I get the privilege really to hear other people's stories. And I don't have the fix. I can tell you that right now, but I know a lot of people that do. And that's the privilege I get right now, is people ringing me up or shooting me a message on social media and me being like, hey, here's some options for you. Hey, I went to Deer Hollow, but if that doesn't work, Warriors Hat down in San Antonio, Texas, over in Virginia, another great facility. Oh, that doesn't work for you, First Responder Wellness down in California. That's another great facility. So that's what I'm trying to do right now, is just spread the message and then push people towards the different resources. And it doesn't have to be a residential treatment facility. There's a lot of other options out there if people are in a tough way, and or if their spouses are, and they're looking for some support.
Thank you so much for that. And again, like you said, I don't know that you're going to find a solution or a solution to your problem, but one thing that you do see here is that it's very common. And as you're teaching your leadership things, that's one of the most effective things that I think is that we can normalize this so that people stop being fearful for their job, that they, this is the cost of service, right? That we don't necessarily look at. So thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you being here. Sarah, as always, thank you for putting together such a wonderful format that has the ability to help so many people across the country, well, internationally, as we've seen in our group here. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Follow up for the next episode. We'll probably bring Chris back on and maybe have a panel discussion with him and some other great guests. So thanks again for joining us.